Buying a home can be a stressful and an emotional process. So in today's video, we're going to try to take some of the stress out of that process by telling you exactly what to expect when buying a home. Now, a lot of home buyers believe that once their offer gets accepted, it's a done deal, right? Wrong. That's where the process actually begins. Getting your offer accepted is just negotiation number one. Negotiations 2, possibly 3, come along a little bit later in the transaction, and we're going to dive into that in today's video, as well as address some of the commonly asked questions of can I back out of the offer after it's been accepted, as well as when should I tell my landlord that I'm leaving my current residence. So we're going to start at the very first step of the home buying process. Now we're going to assume that you've actually written an offer on a property, it's been accepted, and you're going to start that escrow process. You're actually going to go in the process of actually buying the home. Now, finding the home in this environment is one of the tougher things to do out there, and I will say that once you're in escrow, there's this sense of relief almost, because a lot of people out there are making multiple offers on property. But understand at the same time, there's also going to be some buyer's remorse. It's a very large financial transaction. You're putting a lot of money towards a down payment, towards closing costs, and it's completely normal to have some remorse after getting your offer accepted, a little bit of cold feet, if you will. So don't get super stressed out that you're having these feelings. I would say it happens more often than not with home buyers, especially first-time home buyers. So just understand that is part of the process. And we're also going to assume for this video that you've already done your pre-approval, that you were pre-approved when your offer was accepted. So you've had that conversation with your lender. You've provided the initial documentation to that lender. So we're not going to discuss that in today's video. Where we're going to start is once the offer's been accepted, what happens? So the very first step once your offer has been accepted is getting your earnest money, your escrow deposit into the title company, depending on where you're located. Here in California, we actually use escrow companies, at least in Southern California. And so the very first thing that you do is you have to provide that earnest money to the escrow company within 3 days to solidify the transaction. Just because the buyer and the seller have agreed on the purchase on the contract, that deal doesn't actually go into escrow until the earnest money deposit has been submitted. If it's not submitted within 3 days, the seller can actually send out a notice to perform. And if you don't provide that deposit, within the 2 days after that notice to perform, the transaction can be canceled by the seller. So understand, you need to have that earnest money deposit, that money that you were going to put down, it needs to be liquid. It needs to be in a checking account, a savings account. If it's a gift, you need to probably have it in your account so that you have that money to wire or to put into a cashier's check, money order, as soon as your offer's been accepted. The very next step in that process is ordering inspections, right? In this environment, a lot of people are shortening contingency periods. They're shortening the time frames that normally happen in the contract. For example, here in the state of California, we have 17 days per the residential purchase agreement to do inspections. That's the way the contract is written. But in this environment, a lot of home buyers are shortening those contingency periods. They're shortening them to 7 days, 10 days. In some cases, they're waiving these contingencies altogether. I don't recommend that. But when you are shortening the contingency timeframes, it's important that you start ordering inspections as soon as you go into escrow. Now, these inspections are going to consist of a home inspection, any inspections that you plan on doing on that property. If you plan on having a mold inspection or a sewer inspection, or if you're responsible for the termite inspection, these are all inspections that you're going to have set up as soon as your offer gets accepted. Now understand, it's a busy market. A lot of these home inspectors are booked. So it's imperative that you're scheduling these as soon as you go into escrow, as soon as the process is started, so that there aren't any time delays on your part. Now, the appraisal is a separate inspection, and that is going to be ordered by your lender. Now, understand, there are stories out there of lenders taking a couple of weeks to get appraisals back because these appraisal management companies are so far behind. So if you are going to shorten the contingency period on your appraisal, make sure your lender can actually support that time frame. Make sure that they're aware of that time frame and they know how important that time frame is, so that you're not putting yourself at risk of having contingencies, due, and you're not ready to remove them. So once inspections have been ordered, the inspector is going out, they're going to do their inspections on that property, and likely they're going to come back with a list of items, right? I mean, that is how the process works. You're paying these people to find things wrong with the property. The most common things that I see come up in a home inspection are that which are cosmetic or a code that has changed over time. An example of a code that has changed over time would be something like a staircase railing, right? There used to not be a code on how far the bars in the stair railing could be apart. Kids would stick their heads in them and get stuck. Well, they realized that was a problem over time, and now there's an actual code change on that says that those staircase railing, the spindles in it can't be any further than 4 inches apart. And so a lot of times you'll have a home inspector inspect an older home, and the railing hasn't been changed, and so that is something that would come up in a home inspection. But that's for another conversation. So you're going to get these inspections, and once the inspections come back, that is your second opportunity for negotiation, right? So this is where you're going to go through that list. You're going to look at the items. You're going to see which items are important to you out of that home inspection. I would say that the ones that are most important to one person may not be the most important to the second person. So you're going to go through this list and you're going to discuss it with your real estate professional and determine which of that list, or what in that list, or maybe all in that list, or maybe nothing in that list, that you want completed. And once there are items in there that you determine you want fixed, you're going to actually put that in a formal request for repairs. Now, this is something that's done in writing. You put the items that you want repaired in writing. Your real estate agent does this documentation, sends it over to you for signatures. They're going to likely attach a copy of the home inspection report, and they're going to send it over to the listing side for the listing side to review and decide how they want to proceed. Now, a lot of people get scared here because they're like, well, what if the seller doesn't agree with me and wants to back out of the transaction? It doesn't work like that, right? This is a negotiation. There's some going back and forth. So you can submit your list. They can come back and say they agree with it. You can submit your list. They can come back and only agree to part of it. They agree to none of it, whatever. But it's a negotiation. Just because they say no doesn't mean the deal is dead. You, as the buyer, can go back again and ask for additional items. You can accept it. You can ask for a credit. There's a lot that can happen on the back and forth. But, that is where having a professional on your side is truly important. Somebody that understands the process, somebody that knows the process, can guide you through that process and help, you get the best outcome. So, just keep that in mind that, if there's something that is important to you, discuss it with your real estate agent and they can work the process and help guide you through it and hopefully get you a favorable outcome. But that's where negotiation 2 comes in. Negotiation 3 is that appraisal. What if the appraisal comes in less than the asking price? Is that something that, means the deal's going to fall apart? Not necessarily. You can ask for a reduction of that appraised value. You can actually ask the seller to reduce the price of the home to match the appraised value, because the lender is going to lend off the less of the purchase price or the appraised value. And so if it comes in less, you have the, another ability to negotiate. So that's really negotiation number 3. Now, if it comes in at value, you're good to go. If it comes in more than the value of the home, there's nothing that you get on the other side of that, right? There's no credit you get because it appraised for more. Just, that means you're buying a house with a little built-in equity in that property. So nothing to be really aware of there. And a lot of people are concerned, well, why, I thought the house was actually worth more than I paid for. Why does the appraisal come in at the price I paid for? That is very, very common. Nothing to concern yourself with. A lot of times appraisers just bring the value in at what the purchase price was, because that's really all they needed to do for the transaction. They don't need to bring it in anymore because it doesn't benefit the lender who is actually the one that needs the appraisal to begin with. So a lot of times your appraisal will actually come in at the price you've submitted or that has been accepted on the property. So just keep that in mind when going through that process. Now, during the inspection process, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. The first is this is a very, very good time to do your measuring for the property. If you're a home buyer, you plan on buying furniture, you plan on doing some remodeling, this is a good opportunity to have the contractors come in that you plan on using. It's a good opportunity to bring a measuring tape and start doing some measuring, taking photos, whatever it is that you want to do in that property, because this is what happens during that inspection time frame. After the inspection time frame is over, the seller technically doesn't have to allow you back in the property during that process. Now, most sellers will cooperate and allow you to see it, but it's a good time to go through the property and look at all of those things that you might have overlooked when you initially walked through that home. Now, what happens if you walk through the property, the inspection, and the property is way worse than you thought it was? Can you back out of the transaction? It's a common question I get all the time. And the answer is yes, as long as your contingency is still in place, right? You haven't released that contingency in writing. You didn't waive it up front. You can back out of that property, right? You should be able to back out of that property within the contingency timeframes, at least here in the state of California, for pretty much anything, unless you've waived those contingencies. You can have a change of heart and back out for that. But if you've waived something like an appraisal or a home inspection, then you can't use those contingencies to back out. So hopefully that answers your question on being able to back out of the transaction. The last thing you're going to do during this inspection time frame is you're going to review the title report. You're going to review the seller disclosures on the property. You're also going to review the HOA docs. If the property has a homeowners association, this is the opportunity for you to review those. A lot of people have questions about how many pets are allowed in a community, that sort of thing. This is a good opportunity to go through those documents and read them. And don't just read surface level. Look at the budget. Look at all the details of the property, the reserves, how much money this property has in reserves, and also read the minutes. The minutes tell you exactly what's happening in those board meetings and what likely to expect going forward. They talk about assessments. They talk about a lot of these things that you should be aware of if you're buying a home. Now, meanwhile, while all of this is happening, your inspections and you're going through these negotiations and what have you, your lender is actually working behind the scenes, submitting the documentation that you provided up front, along with any updated documentation that you provided to them, to the lender for review, to go into underwriting for the actual lender to underwrite the loan and come back and say whether or not it's approved. Now, you might be saying, well, I was pre-approved up front. Why do I have to do this? Well, what happens is, you're typically working with a lender who is a middleman, if you will, whether they're a broker or a banker or what have you. A lot of times, they're just doing the initial underwrite of the file. They're looking at the documentation saying, yeah, it fits the guidelines, at which point it goes into escrow. They have to take that purchase contract, that fully accepted purchase contract, along with the title report and all of this documentation, and send it formally to the lender for the lender to review. Now, once the lender reviews it, and says, yes, this meets guidelines, they send out a formal pre-approval. At that point, the lender is likely to reach out to you again for additional documentation. Now, it might be updated pay stubs, it might be updated bank statements, it might be a letter clarifying something that was reported somewhere. It might be an updated verification of employment. But understand that the lender is the middleman, right? Don't get frustrated with your lender because they're reaching out to you for additional documentation. The only reason they reach out to you and ask for additional documents is because they're being requested to do that so that your loan can close. So during this process, your lender's working behind the scenes. Us as real estate agents are also dealing with a lot of paperwork behind the scenes. Now, there's often this misconception when buying a home that there's something that you have to do for that entire escrow period, right? So if you said, I'm closing escrow in 30 days, home buyers believe that there's actually something that they have to do for 30 straight days during that process. And the reality is there's not. There, a lot of what happens behind the scenes with regards to your real estate agent doing their job, your lender doing your job. You as a home buyer are really only involved in the process when you're doing inspections, you're doing reviews of documents, negotiations, that sort of thing. So a lot of times, you will feel like maybe you're being left in the dark of the transaction, but that's because a lot of what's happening is, you're not needed for that process, but your lender and your real estate agent should be keeping you up to date through that process so you know exactly what is going on. So now that you've done your inspections, you reviewed the documents, you're probably getting close to the release of the contingencies on that property, which basically means that you'd be putting your earnest money, your escrow deposit at risk. Once you release the contingencies on that transaction, where your escrow deposit and your earnest money could become the sellers if you decide not to move forward for any reason, or maybe you lose your job, some sort of employment, issue, or something comes up that you weren't aware of, something changes on your credit, you've released that contingency. That is where your deposit could actually be at risk. But typically speaking, I've been doing this 20 years, knock on wood, never had a buyer lose their earnest money. So as long as you're working with a professional real estate agent, a professional lender, they're both doing their job, you should be, in good hands to release those deposits. But once the deposits are released, then that is a good time to start thinking about telling your landlord that you're moving out. Now, you might say, why wouldn't I tell my landlord as soon as my offer gets accepted that I'm moving out? Because what happens if you get into the process of buying that home and something pops up on the inspection, something pops up on the appraisal, something changes during the transaction, and you no longer want to move forward, but you've already told your landlord that you're moving out. Maybe your landlord has already gone out and found a different tenant for that property, and you're basically putting yourself at risk of being homeless or trying to find another property to live in short term while you find another property. So I found it best in my experience that clients don't tell their landlords that they're moving until contingencies have been released. Now, understand there will be a little bit of double paying. You'll be paying, on your mortgage. You'll be paying on your rent for a little bit of crossover there while going through that process, but it provides security. And at the end of the day, security is very, very important in the process. It gives you the wherewithal to know that you're not, your back isn't against the wall, that you're not in a hard place having to accept things that you don't want to accept because you've already told your landlord that you're moving out and you have nowhere to go, right? Don't lose your ability to negotiate. Just like I don't want you falling in love with the property as a home buyer until it's closed. I want you to like the property. I want you to want to make an offer on it, but I don't want you to fall in love with it because you lose your ability to negotiate. Well, when you tell your landlord up front that you're moving out, you make all of these plans, you're essentially giving up your ability to negotiate because you've already made all of these plans. So if something comes back and the seller doesn't agree with it, you're more likely to move forward with it, even if you don't agree with it, because you're in this hard place. And one more thing I want to talk about before we get into the final stage of the process, and that is not going out and running up new credit, changing cars, getting new employment, doing anything crazy during the loan process. Now, your lender is probably going to have this conversation with you, but I want to reiterate it because I've seen a lot of wrenches thrown into transactions because people have gone out and decided that they're going to purchase new furniture for their property, and they've gone out and got a new credit card, and that credit card now shows on the credit report has a balance and could offset your debt to income ratio. Same thing with getting a new car, going out and getting a car with a higher car payment and or changing jobs during the transaction can put a wrench in the transaction. So if you're planning on doing that, have a conversation with your lender before doing it. Now, the very final step in the home buying process before you sign your loan docs, maybe you've signed your loan docs, and that is the final walkthrough of the property. You're going to walk through the property typically and confirm that the seller has actually done the repairs that you've requested. Maybe you didn't request any repairs. You're just walking through the property to make sure it's in the same condition as when you initially purchased the property or when you initially wrote an offer on the property. Now, some people might say, well, shouldn't the property be vacant so I can walk through it with nothing in it to make sure, there's nothing I wasn't aware of? Ideally, yes. But many transactions, the seller is actually still in the property during that final walkthrough, right? So you're still just, doing the same visual inspection that you did before. And understand, if there's anything in there that you weren't aware of or anything new, you're going to have the opportunity as a buyer to bring those up to the seller, even at the close of the transaction, right? Even if the transaction's closed, you can still bring those up. It can be something that happens after the close of escrow. I've had issues happen with buyers, and we've been able to get through these after the close of escrow. But typically speaking, your final walkthrough happens at the end within a couple of days of closing. And in some cases, like I mentioned, you've signed your loan docs. Some cases you haven't signed your loan docs. But once you sign your loan docs, the deal's not done yet, right? There's still a little bit more time, in that process. And that is, you actually wiring the closing funds into escrow or into the title company. And that's the down payment plus any closing costs that were due. You wire that money in. All of that goes back to the lender for review. Once the lender reviews it, then typically it goes to the county records and the deal is done. It is not done until it actually records. Understand, see a lot of people celebrating at the end, closing, I've signed my loan docs. I've seen deals fall apart, believe it or not, after loan docs have been signed. So, just keep in mind, that nothing is final until the keys are in your hand. So hopefully that was helpful. I realize this is a long video. There's a lot thrown at you. And this is honestly something that your real estate agent and lender should guide you through in the process, but hopefully provided a little bit of insight to you. But maybe you watch this and you're just starting the home buying process. Maybe you haven't even been formally approved yet, or you're going through the process wondering what the first steps are before you actually go look for a home. Well, do me a favor, check out this video here. I talk about buying a home in 2021. It's something that you should keep in mind if you're just starting the process. I touch on everything that you need to know. So the video is here. Check it out. Let me know your comments below. If you have any additional questions, put those below as well. But for now, I appreciate you taking the time to watch. I appreciate all the support. Hope to see you again soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye.